What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And before we get to this review, I just want to say a big thanks to those kind folks over at Hulu and Disney for sending me over an early screener for this one ahead of its release on their platform starting on June 6th. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the new animated anthology film within this franchise known as Predator: Killer of Killers. Directed by Dan Trachtenberg and co-directed by Wassung, this film stars people like Lindsay, LaVanchy, Ozawa, Chang-Chien, Rick Gonzalez, Michael Biehn, and more. And before we get too far into this video, I want to say a big thanks to all of you guys for taking the time to click here on a video. And if you guys are into early reviews like this, as well as up-to-date reviews, retrospective reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, I really appreciate you. And when I first heard this film was being made, I was pretty excited. I'm always a sucker for a franchise including an animated feature or a TV show somewhere in the franchise. And Dan Trachtenberg actually directed Prey just a few years ago, which was one of my favorite films of the last few years, but was also one of my favorite Predator films immediately. It was a cool prequel to the franchise that did something different, kind of took it back to basics while also having its unique identity in its setting and in its characters. And so when I saw that he was coming back to the franchise with a new anthology animated film, it seemed different enough to give it its own identity within the franchise, but also seemed like something that could be really cool. So with all that said, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on it. Predator: Killer of Killers is an animated anthology film comprising 3 distinct stories, each set in a different historical period. The first one focuses on the Viking era and focuses on a Viking raider who leads her son on a bloody quest for revenge. The second one takes place during feudal Japan. A ninja turns against his samurai brother in a brutal battle for succession. And the last one is set in World War II as a pilot investigates an otherworldly threat to the Allied cause. In each of these tales, these formidable warriors become prey to the ultimate killer of killers, a predator. The overall idea of this film is really cool because I already mentioned you have 3 different chapters that all take place in different time periods, and it all culminates in a 4th chapter where these 3 stories come together and the Predator storyline comes together in its own ways. And so immediately I really enjoyed the visuals of this. The animated style, I've heard a lot of people compare it to a Netflix series known as Blue Eye Samurai. I've actually not seen that show, but based on some of the imagery I've seen, it looks very similar. And in a lot of ways, it feels like a style we've seen a lot in animation these days, where you have it kind of feel like a painting, where the animation in terms of the movements of the actual characters sometimes feels like the frame rate is dropped ever so slightly to kind of give it this bit of a little bit more of a clunky look to it, but it still has a cool stylized look to it. In general, everything about the contrast on the characters' faces, the blood, and the overall look of it just feels very much like a moving painting, which this film definitely has that vibe. And immediately, this film does not hold back. I mean, Dan Trachtenberg wanted to make this a film for Predator fans. I think there's going to be some people that just say, oh, there's a new Predator cartoon out, which is such a weak label I feel a lot of people give to things that are then turned into animation. But this film does not hold back in any way, shape, or form, with it kind of including some of maybe the most violent scenes that we've seen in any Predator film, which is obviously a high bar because a lot of the Predator films have been very bloody. But because this is an animated film, the medium allows for you to kind of like turn your brain off to reality a little bit more and allows you to do a little bit more. So the action sequences in this I thought were really incredible, immediately with the first one being set in the Viking era and then the second one being set in feudal Japan. The action in these sequences was top tier, with the feudal Japan sequence easily being my favorite, where you have some samurai and some ninja action going on in there. And all of this is happening while there's this predator in each of these individual stories. And what was really cool too is each predator is different in each story. In the first one with the Vikings, you have a predator that's a little bit more of a brute. In the second one that's in feudal Japan, you have this more fast-paced predator that's amidst this combat that very much fits the samurai and ninja action. And then in the third one that takes place during World War II, most of that is actually taking place in a plane. So you have a predator that's using technology and using, a predator ship more so than actual hand-to-hand combat. And so it was awesome because all 3 of these stories were able to be their own thing, expand on characters in a different way, and show us 3 different kinds of combatants that were completely different, which when it's all brought together in the final sequence is able to kind of utilize all of their strengths in different ways. Immediately, this film had its own identity, not only in its look, but also in its action. I think because of the fact that it's animated, a lot of times allowed these 3 different storylines to have really cool over over-the-top action. Like I already mentioned, the feudal Japan one was definitely my favorite, but the Viking one was cool and brutal. And we don't only see badass action between these combatants and the Predator, but we also get to see these people fighting humans, and a lot of the action and the hand-to-hand combat between the humans was great and incredibly bloody. And I really want to very much emphasize the bloody part. This is not an animated feature that in any way, shape, or form holds back from what the franchise is known for. There's a lot of beheadings, a lot of dismemberment in general, and characters that get absolutely brutally destroyed in here. So if you were a fan of anime or just top tier, like brutal, fast-paced action in animation, this film is definitely going to work for you. I can even see this being something that will work as a really solid entryway for a lot of people who maybe haven't gotten into the older Predator stuff, because in a lot of ways this feels like it modernizes it while also very much keeping it true to the OG feel and vibe of what Predator is all about. And just in terms of the animation, it looked cool. I love the design of all the Predators we saw in here as well. And I just think animation in general allows your mind to kind of, again, let go of reality a little bit and allows you to kind of suspend your disbelief into some of these sequences being very heightened and over the top and fun. And so when you have that element already, and then you add in the fact that the animation is crisp and beautiful and bloody and kind of goes for a darker, grittier tone and doesn't try to kind of make it kiddie and friendly, you just have a film that overall is really engaging. Now, with all that said, I think what maybe holds this movie back a little bit is what a lot of anthology films have, which is just a lack of emotional depth and a lot of character depth. The first story with the Vikings I thought was pretty cool. There was a little bit more emotional depth there with the character. You get to understand a little bit more about our human characters that are taking on the Predator in that story. Not everybody, but specifically the main Viking woman that's a part of that story. And then when you go to the feudal Japan one, I really enjoy that one because there's almost little to no dialogue there. There's a little bit of dialogue in that storyline, but majority of it is a lot of visual storytelling, which I think really helped and it kind of added to its overall feel and vibe. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a storyline that you'll feel emotionally connected to the characters. It's just like the coolest one without a doubt, where it does have a little bit of emotionality, specifically between the two brothers that are involved in that storyline, which I really enjoyed. And then in the third story, the main character there is a little bit more annoying, but I do think they do a good job of making him a likable character enough. But by the time the movie comes to an end, I won't necessarily say that I was emotionally connected to the characters, but I feel like you just kind of have to know what you're watching when it comes down to an anthology story like this. It's not really something that's asking you to be emotionally connected to the characters, but instead it's just asking you to kind of come along for a journey that's able to do a lot in these small little bite-sized storylines. And I just think ultimately as an action movie, this movie is really cool. It knows what it is and it breezed by. It didn't really feel like it overstayed its welcome. I never found myself bored while watching the film, and ultimately I just found the characters and the overall action and the overall aesthetic of this film to feel really cool. And I think Dan Trachtenberg clearly has an eye for what he wants to do with this franchise, and the film also leaves things open for possible more stories and more anthology stories in general in the future, which I'm really excited about. If this film does do well, maybe Dan Trachtenberg and the creators will be able to come back and do something different with a follow-up to this. It has a conclusion, but it also leaves things very open-ended, and there's some cool connective tissue at the end of the film to what Dan Trachtenberg did in the past with Prey. So I think it's really cool to be able to see a director's vision across a live action and then into animation. But in general, yeah, this is a fun time. I think that if you're a fan of Predator, if you're a fan of a cool action animated film, if you like blood, guts, gore, dismemberment, all that stuff, this film is definitely for you. And if you are watching this and you're not really a huge Predator fan, but you maybe want something to kind of pull you into the franchise, I honestly really recommend this. I think this is going to be, like I said, a really cool entryway into people who maybe aren't a huge fan of the franchise or maybe haven't seen anything on the franchise before, but want to get a general idea of what the Predators are about. I think this does a good enough job to really give you the understanding that the Predators are looking for these badass warriors to face off against, and being able to see these three completely different kinds of warriors take on the badass, very different kinds of Predators that we see over the course of the film. And there's some other ones that just have really cool designs. I think in general it's going to be a really cool way to bring people into the franchise, but I can definitely see this being something that's going to make a lot of the people who are fans of the franchise already really enjoy it. It feels different, it feels unique, it has its own identity within the franchise, and ultimately it's something I found myself having a really good time with, despite the fact that because of it's an anthology film, you just don't feel as emotionally connected to the characters. But I would say that even some of the best Predator films in the franchise tend to kind of lean into badassdom or cool factor or whatever the case may be, and you don't necessarily walk out of those films emotionally connected to all the characters anyway. So if you just go into this as a cool, fun, action animated anthology film, I think you'll have a really, really good time. So that's going to be my thoughts on Predator, Killer of Killers. Definitely let me know down below, did you guys check this movie out? Are you planning to check this movie out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.